All right, looks like we are live. Good morning, everybody. Chuck Holton here, coming to you from our studio in Panama. And I appreciate all of you being here. Please do me a favor and post where you're watching from in the comments. We'd like to see all the different places. We got Bend, Oregon. We got Shelbyville, Indiana, and the great country of Scotland. I love Scotland. It's one of my favorite places. Visalia, California, Seagrove, North Carolina. People from all over the globe. Some Brits are in the house. Israel, LA, Boise, Idaho, Avon Park, Florida, New Orleans, going back so fast, South Africa, Haneda, Israel, Texas, Houston. I mean, good grief, look at all you people coming in from BC, Canada, Columbus, Ohio, Lomo, California, Australia, Alabama, North Carolina. Unbelievable. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. We appreciate all of you. And we got a good show for you today. There's a lot going on. Residents in northern Israel are being warned to prepare for possible conflict across the border from Lebanon in the coming days. That's the first time in many months that the people up there have had to worry about possible rocket fire, drones, or missiles coming across from Lebanon. And that's because Hezbollah is vowing to retaliate for all the strikes that are happening in Lebanon right now. Israel is really pounding Hezbollah and taking out infrastructure and headquarters and underground arms caches and commanders and everything else to try to keep Hezbollah from being able to reconstitute. But they may have to actually do a ground incursion shortly to actually keep that from happening. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on that. We're going to talk about that some more here as we go along. But before we get to all that, I want to just give a shout out to our sponsors for today's video, Juvenon. Take a look.
Look, I work out hard because life is hard. And in my line of work, I might have to drag somebody's carcass off the battlefield with zero warning. And for the rest of us, the mission's just the same. We're all getting older. And after 60, your full-time job should be staving off decrepitude. So that's why I care about performance, not gym selfies, but real output. One lever that I've found that actually moves the needle on this is nitric oxide. Your body makes it to tell your blood vessels to open up and get oxygen and nutrients to your muscles and your brain when you need them. The problem is those levels drop fast with age. Some estimates say up to 85% by your 60s. That means that you press the gas, but the engine doesn't answer. So I swear by nitric oxide supplements in my workouts. If you want that edge without sugar or caffeine, go look at Bloodflow7 from Juvenon. What's under their hood? S7 botanical complexes and nitrosogene, which ramps up your nitric oxide production, transresveratrol to support healthy blood flow, and bioperine, so your body actually absorbs the stuff instead of wasting it. Receipts matter. One study showed S7 alone boosted nitric oxide by 230% in 3 hours. Another showed transresveratrol helped open arteries by up to 62%. So just take 2 small capsules, no caffeine, no sugar, just performance support. If your routine's built for real life, not comfort, give Bloodflow7 a look. Bloodflow7.com/hot, over 5,000 5-star reviews and a 60-day risk-free guarantee. Go to Bloodflow7.com/hot and train for the world as it is.
All right. Cool. Let's put me back up there. Thank you to our sponsors today, Juvenon, for sponsoring the show. So the Israelis have been striking and targeting targets in Lebanon for the entire war. And the so-called ceasefire that took place between the United States and the Lebanese army has been repeatedly violated by Hezbollah, not so much in firing rockets and missiles across the border, but in trying to rebuild their forces south of the Litani River. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. I just want to show you this map here. This is the area that we're talking about. So the red area there is the part of Lebanon that is south of the Litani River. That's the part that Israel has been talking about. And they say that they will not allow Hezbollah to reconstitute anything south of the Litani River. So that area there. Now, the strikes that they've been conducting have been in many places, not just south of the Litani River. They've been striking north there, up in Leah, and explosion was in the city of Tyre, which is south, right over here on the coast, south of the Litani River. And so there's that. Now, one thing I want to point out, I want to see if I can pull up a different map so that I can show this to you a little bit better. I have another map that makes this a little easier to see. So let me see if I can find that real quick right here. This map, let's remove that one and put this one up. This map shows strikes that have taken place inside Lebanon. And this is as of about a year ago, so there's a lot more strikes than what you see here. But what I want to point out is over on the right side of that area south of the Litani River, now in this case it's green, where you see where it matches up with the border of Syria. And then you see the pink area inside Syria that is currently being held by Israel. It's occupied territory inside Syria. And I want you to see that it kind of exactly matches up. So the buffer zone that Israel has created inside Syria exactly corresponds with the width of the buffer zone that they want to create inside Lebanon. And that would make Israel much, much safer on both fronts. So that's their ultimate goal here. Israel's ultimate goal is just to create and maintain that buffer. Now, as the Israelis have been targeting this area, we see here again the strikes that they've been hitting. This was the one in Tyre I told you about. We've also seen, let's see if I've got this one here. Where'd it go? Here we go. Israel has been doing what they always do, which is they've been warning the people inside Lebanon of where they're about to strike. So they're saying, look, everybody get out of this area because we're about to hit this area very, very hard. And if you'll look closely there, they're actually pointing out the actual building that they're about to flatten. And they're saying, here's the red circle is a 500-meter radius around that building. So you better get out of the way of that building, okay? I mean, you definitely don't want to be anywhere near that anytime in the near future because we're about to flatten this building. So this is the upshot of those warnings. These are traffic jams you're seeing inside Lebanon as people are trying to get out of the area that Israel is about to strike. And we also have footage of the actual strike that they made after making that. Ali Madad, I don't know what that means. Ali Madad, maybe somebody who speaks Arabic can tell me what Ali Madad means. But they know where to point these cameras because Israel has told them where they're going to strike. So a lot of Arab media now inside Lebanon is saying that Israel may be about to start a multi-day ground invasion of Lebanon. This would be the most significant operation that the IDF conducted inside Lebanon since the ceasefire took effect. And this is specifically because Hezbollah says in a letter that they sent to the leaders of Lebanon, that it will from now on respond to Israeli attacks against its militants. They emphasize that this does not necessarily mean a decision for war, but stresses the organization's right to respond, and they're couching it now as this is in defense of Lebanon. Well, even the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army know Hezbollah it does not care about defending Lebanon per se. They are a proxy of Iran. They're doing the will of Iran, and they've actually been a real drag on the Lebanese government, the Lebanese economy, ever since they took power. And they are as much a political force in Lebanon as a military one. And so the Lebanese government, the Lebanese president, everybody, they're really having a hard time with this, because the United States gave Lebanon an ultimatum that they must disarm Hezbollah by November, by the end of November. And if they don't, there will be severe consequences. A lot of that may take the form of diplomatic consequences or economic consequences, as the United States says, okay, we're not going to continue to fund things that we're currently funding in Lebanon. Right now, we're sending more than $300 million a year in military aid to Lebanon to try to prop up their army, because up until Operation Beeper, Grim Beeper, that took place, the Hezbollah forces inside Lebanon were actually stronger than the Lebanese army. So the United States is trying to strengthen the Lebanese army and make them able to take out Hezbollah, and at least degrade them to the point where they're not a military threat anymore. But the message that Hezbollah is sending to the president of Lebanon is said that they will not even discuss the issue of giving up their weapons. And they warn that negotiation with Israel is a trap that only serves Israeli interests. And they add that Hezbollah is concerned with stopping Israeli aggression and not being dragged into negotiations. So they prefer to negotiate militarily. Okay. Okay, so thank you, Devorah. I appreciate that clarification. The pink area is annexed area, not occupied. Okay, all right. I'll give you that. Now the map that I showed of that labels it as occupied, but you would expect that to be the case, because this is from a media outlet that considers anything there were even in the Golan to be occupied territory. But as we know, the Golan Heights are Israeli territory, and what Israel is doing inside Syria is creating a buffer zone. And we're going to talk a lot more about what's going on in Syria, because we have word coming out from Reuters today that the United States is planning to build a base in Damascus, a military base, and put troops in Damascus. This could be more than 1,000 troops going there. We've been pulling troops out of Syria, so this is a big change. And there was one comment I wanted to get to that says, I thought there were still troops in Syria guarding the stolen oil for Israel. Well, echo the collapse. That's an ignorant statement, because number one, Israel doesn't get any oil from Syria at all. They don't need to, and they wouldn't want to, because the oil that comes out of Syria, number one, is far too little. That's not near enough to move the needle in terms of what Israel needs. Number two, it's very dirty, very poorly extracted. I've been to those oil fields, and they are disgusting. They just dump oil on the ground everywhere. It's super dirty, and not. It would be very expensive to refine that oil. So they have a hard time. Most of the oil that comes out of Syria gets sent to like African countries, Iran, places like that. And so Israel gets the vast majority of its oil from Azerbaijan via Turkey. And I'll show you here on a map, if I can find my map here. So there's a pipeline that runs from Azerbaijan over here. So it runs from Azerbaijan, and it can't cross Armenia because Azerbaijan and Armenia don't get along. So that pipeline goes up through Tbilisi in Georgia, and then comes across into Turkey, and comes all the way across Turkey, and down to the port. Where did that port go? In Ceyhan. Where'd it go? I just lost it. Let's see here. Let's pull up Ceyhan. There it is. So it comes down to the port near Ceyhan, and then gets put on ships and shipped south in the Mediterranean, past Syria, past Lebanon, into, well, actually a lot of it goes into Ashkelon, but they can go into Haifa as well. So that represents 40 to 60% of all the oil that Israel gets, and that's one of the reasons why Israel maintains friendly relations with Azerbaijan, even though Azerbaijan is a extremist Muslim dictatorship. So typically they wouldn't be friendly, but they're friendly for two reasons. Israel needs their oil, and Azerbaijan is against Iran, so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that causes a lot of heartache for Armenians because they have been on the receiving end of a lot of Israeli munitions that were purchased by Azerbaijan. This is, during the war in 2020 and then again in 2023. That's a very sad state of affairs. Israel and Armenia really should be allies. They both face existential threats from, extremist Muslim nations that surround them. They've both been the subject of pogroms and genocide at the hands of those Muslim and invaders, that sort of thing. So they really should be friends. But I've said this many times. Israel doesn't really give much of a thought to Armenia. And the Armenians, there are quite a few who live in Israel. There's a whole Armenian quarter in that old city of Jerusalem, for example. But those Armenians actually kind of relate more to the Palestinians than they do to the Jews, and that creates a little conflict. So it's just an unfortunate sort of outgrowth of those geopolitics. But anyway, to answer the comment from Echo the Collapse, guarding stolen oil for Israel, well, the only oil that's being stolen is the oil that's being smuggled into Iran. None of that oil is going to Israel at all. Israel is not doing anything in Syria in order to get oil from them. Israel gets its oil from Azerbaijan, Brazil, and there are a couple other places where they can get it if they need to. If they lost the oil supply from Azerbaijan, they would still be able to get, they'd be able to replace that. They actually built a pipeline down in the south in Eilat that's bidirectional, that they export stuff, they export oil now, but they could import it if they needed to from Iraq and other places in the Middle East, Kuwait and places like that. So they have a backup plan if necessary. Plus they have a pretty good amount of oil stored in Israel that would get them through any bumps in the road. So no, Israel does not need any oil from Syria. They're not stealing oil from Syria or anything like that. That's an asinine statement. Mark Bass, thank you for that $2. And also David Landry, thank you very much. Asking for updates on Leah. Leah is the little South African girl, 8 years old, who's got cystic fibrosis that lives here in Panama. And last month we raised about $30,000 for her medical care. and I very much appreciate all of your generosity in doing so. It's been a real hassle trying to get that money to them because we have to send it down from the States. Their bank in Panama won't accept wire transfers from the States, so we're having to wire it to our account in Panama and then transfer it from our account to their account. And it's, of course, every time you wire that much money, they put like a 10-day hold on it, and it's just a pain moving money. That's one thing I like about crypto, is that you can move it across borders very, very easily. And unfortunately, we weren't able to use crypto in this case. But we were able to figure out how to give all of that money to Leah without having to take any money out for taxes, because typically I would have had to pay about $6,500 in taxes on that because I was the one collecting the money. But we worked it out so that we can transfer it pretty much directly from you through the Give Send Go site to us and immediately to Leah and get her what she needs so she can get the stem cell treatment that she needs. So she's had one round of stem cell treatment and it dramatically helped her. She gained about 20 pounds in 3 or 4 months, which is huge for her. That's gotten her to the point where she can walk, where she can use the bathroom on her own. And she still is attached to an oxygen machine all the time, but her oxygen use has gone down about 13% because of the first round of stem cell treatment. Many of you asked about that stem cell treatment because I had it done personally in January and I saw some real benefits from that. Don't have to use my reading glasses anymore, for example. And so we've had probably 60 or 70 people that have contacted us asking about that stem cell treatment. If you're interested in stem cell treatment, we found everybody that we know who has had it done has just raved about it. I've had nobody that's done it that said, I didn't see any benefit, wish I hadn't done it. Stem cells, what they do is sort of act as cheerleaders for your own body's ability to regenerate itself. So if you have old injuries that are bothering you, especially joints or back injuries, if you have degenerative injuries, even things that are like autoimmune problems or things like that, we've seen it do dramatic things to help them. Kids with autism, the stem cell treatment helps them tremendously. There's just a lot of things, cancer and heart disease and things like that it tends to reverse. And it just essentially makes you 10 years younger. I mean, that's the way I look at it. It lasts for a couple of years. And so we've seen a lot of really good results from people that have had it done. One of the hot zonians who had it done said it cured her asthma. Another one said that her arthritis went away. People have said their brain fog lifted, things like that. So, they're not sponsoring me or anything like that. I'm not getting paid for that, but we certainly are happy to pass along the information if you're interested in the stem cell treatment. And so if so, go just send an email to info@holtonnews.com. The money that we raise for Leah will allow her to get another 2 cc's of these umbilical cord stem cells that should maybe even get her off the oxygen completely and really help her kind of lead a more normal life. So thank you very much for doing that. And in addition to that, we also believe that it'll get her enough money so her dad can take a break a little bit, because he's been working 7 days a week to try to make about 12 grand a month just for her medication. So it's helped quite a bit. So back to Israel, the defense minister, Israel Katz, told the IDF that they need to turn the area adjacent to the Israel-Egypt border into a closed military zone and change the rules of engagement down there and sort of do the same thing that they're doing along the northern border and in Syria in terms of creating a buffer zone. But rather than create it in Egypt, they'd have to go to war with Egypt to do that. They're going to create it inside Gaza and along the border between Israel and Egypt, and just create just sort of a buffer zone. That would be fairly easy down there because you're talking about the Negev. It's not like there's a lot down there. There's very, very little actually that's close to the Egyptian border, except for the town of Eilat. And so I'm not sure what they're going to do with Eilat. That may be kind of carved out. Typically, if they make it a closed military zone, then all the civilians would have to be evacuated from there. And I really doubt they're going to evacuate a large resort town like Eilat, which is right down there on the coast. So anyway, that we'll have to see what happens with that. But part of the reason they're doing that is because they're seeing a tremendous amount of drone traffic coming across from Egypt and also from Jordan, bringing weapons into Gaza, trying to smuggle weapons into Gaza. I mentioned this on the previous live we did, where they have these octocopters that can hold like, a half a dozen AR-15s or AK-47s and explosives and grenades and all sorts of stuff. And they're flying them across. There's some entity, which is likely Hamas, Hamas representatives in Egypt, who are procuring these weapons and flying them across into Gaza. And so that's something that they're trying to crack down on. We don't know exactly how many are getting through. We only know how many that they're intercepting, and it's likely they're not intercepting all of them. So that's a major issue there. Now, there was one more hostage body that was identified and returned. He was a Tanzanian citizen. He was murdered on October 7th, and he was working is an agricultural student in Israel on October 7th. His name is Joshua Loito Molay, and again, that I think gets us down to 5 or 6 hostage bodies that are left in Gaza. I think that's 5 actually. They returned 2 a couple days ago, and they can't just take their word for it, because Hamas has returned bodies that they say were Israeli hostages that actually weren't. So Israel has to do some DNA analysis and stuff to figure out whether or not they're actually some of their hostages. It takes a little time to do that. And they have determined that this body was of the guy from Tanzania. Also of note is that the 2 previous bodies that were returned, one of them was the last remaining American dual citizen, Israeli-American hostage that had been killed on October 7th as well. So there are no more American hostages in there. So this is essentially, we're actually I'm very surprised, frankly, that the Israelis have gotten back this many of their deceased hostages. I thought many of those would have been, you're thinking, it's more than 2 years now since October 7th. And so many of these bodies would have been very much degraded and decomposed. So, it kind of makes you wonder, what are they actually returning? Just bones or, mush or what? They're having to dig these things up. They were already buried. How do they know what they were, especially Hamas digging them up? They must have kept very good track of where these things were. Some of these are being found inside the zone in Gaza that is still being held by Israel, the yellow zone. And they're being found by armed Hamas factions. So how does that work? Are these armed Hamas guys, how is Israel allowing armed Hamas terrorists into the zone that they control with full knowledge? And it's likely because they're accompanying Red Cross members, and so Israel's not going to bomb the Red Cross, and these guys are able to come in. But wouldn't surprise me if they're also digging up arms caches. They've found a couple of instances of that. They, of course, still have these couple hundred Hamas terrorists who they say are trapped in tunnels inside the yellow zone. Israel has said, look, you got 2 options. You can stay underground and die of starvation, or you can give yourselves up. They've been trying to negotiate something with Israel and let them have safe passage, but Israel's like, no, we're not doing that. Been a couple of videos that have come out of Israel pumping concrete into those tunnels, but it looked to me like video that was actually a video I've seen before, like about 6 months ago or something. So it could have been old video of Israel filling up a tunnel with concrete and not current. We haven't been able to corroborate that footage at all. So back to Lebanon now. I just want to sort of wrap that up. The IDF issued evacuation warnings to the members of about 30 different villages inside Lebanon. These are not evacuation warnings for Israeli citizens in northern Israel, but they did put out a warning to the Israelis that live in northern Israel to, number one, be prepared for some explosions because we're going to be blowing stuff up inside Lebanon, so don't freak out. And number two, be prepared to run for your shelters because Hezbollah is saying that they are going to retaliate for these strikes inside Lebanon. So it remains to be seen whether or not Hezbollah will make good on that. I mean, from all appearances, Hezbollah has been significantly degraded inside Lebanon to the point where they're really not going to be able to mount a significant strike on Israel from southern Lebanon. They're not going to be able to do that. Israel continues. I think the thing that is really making the difference for Israel is that they have set up a incredibly robust intelligence gathering apparatus inside Lebanon. Very, very robust. And Hezbollah can't sneeze without Israel knowing about it up there. So that's why they keep striking these Hezbollah commanders. Anytime they come out from underground, they get, spontaneously decombusted or spontaneously combusted by a drone strike or something like that from Israel. So Israel is keeping the lid on Hezbollah, and they're saying they're going to do what's necessary to continue to do that, even if it means another ground incursion into Lebanon. But the real significant news around that is that now the Lebanese government says that if Israel makes another ground incursion into Lebanon, that the Lebanese army will be fighting back against them, that Israel will be fighting the Lebanese army. That would be a big change. So far, Israel has not been fighting the Lebanese army. They've only been fighting against Hezbollah. But Israel has the capability to fight the Lebanese army if necessary, and they're going to do what they have to do to protect their people. On top of all that, it might sound like, wow, is the war really going to ramp up now? Or are we going to have to, is this ever going to end for Israel? We've seen continued strikes and missions that they've been accomplishing inside the areas of Judea and Samaria. We have a video here from an operation. I want to say this is Tulkarm, but I may be wrong about that. But this is an operation that took place last night where IDF troops were engaging militants inside some of those areas of Judea and Samaria. That is going to continue for some time to come. There's still a lot of Hamas affiliated operatives in those areas that the media calls the West Bank. Hamas still has a presence in Lebanon as well. So that in and of itself is not going to end. However, because of the success that Israel has had fighting Hamas in Gaza, getting their hostages back, and really keeping a lid on the rest of these 7 fronts that they've had to fight on throughout this war, they have announced an official end to combat operations. And so they're transitioning the war now. And so, you could say that today, or whenever they made that announcement, it might have been yesterday, was the official end to this war, as far as Israel is concerned. And anything that happens from now on doesn't mean that all of the fighting is going to end. It doesn't mean that Israel's not going to strike anymore or anything like that. But it says that from Israel's point of view, the war, the actual war, is over. And now they're transitioning into what we would call sustainment operations, where they're going to focus more on surveillance and precision strikes on, worthy targets. So that's huge, because Israel now has begun a mass demobilization of reserve forces across multiple fronts. That means thousands of soldiers are being released from duty and they're being allowed to go back to their lives. That's going to be a huge economic boost for Israel. It's going to allow a lot of these reservists to resume their normal lives, work and study and things like that. So Israel is going to shift toward, they call it a, quote, enhanced border security phase that, again, will focus on intelligence gathering, defensive readiness, and localized deterrence rather than full-scale warfare. If something changes, they could always go back to full-scale warfare, but this is super significant. This is a big deal. And I think that, it might be time to say Mazel Tov to the IDF and allow the people of Israel to sort of breathe a collective sigh of release. And after 2 long, hard years, the full-scale war between Israel and its enemies is coming to a close. That is, major. That's major. And folks, I think what we need to do is I think we need to stop right here and we need to say thanks to God, because we have seen how God has miraculously protected Israel and provided for Israel throughout this conflict, even when the entire world was against them, even when the United States under Joe Biden was trying to throttle Israel's response. They managed to return the majority of their hostages alive. It looks like they may end up getting almost all of their hostages out, maybe all but just a couple, even the deceased ones. They have significantly damaged Hezbollah, Iran in the 12-day war with Israel. They've significantly damaged the Houthi infrastructure. They've very much degraded Hamas in Gaza, and they continue to put pressure on them elsewhere. They've struck at Iranian-backed militias in Syria. They've established a buffer zone inside Syria that will definitely make Israel a safer place. They've even managed to create the conditions for a sort of demilitarized zone in the southern part of Syria that should help the Druze in that area be able to live their lives in peace. That has not happened yet. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But we've seen all of that. We've seen multiple kinetic attacks by Iran against Israel. And the corresponding damage that was done to Israel was incredibly small for the scale of the attacks. We've seen 30 or 40,000 rockets and missiles and drones fired from Gaza and Lebanon against Israel, and some from Syria as well, with just an exceedingly small death toll inside Israel. Israel should be on its knees thanking the Most High God. If you worship Hashem, if you worship, God, everybody should be thanking God for that protection and for bringing peace to Jerusalem. So let's say a quick prayer to do that. If you look, we got 2,500 people watching. I know all of you aren't the praying type, but please just humor me, and as I thank God for this, and you join me in that. Lord, I just come to you right now, and we just are so amazed by the miraculous protection that you've given Israel as you've kept your hand on your chosen land, your chosen people throughout this horrible war. And I know that it's been incredible tragedy for so many families. There's not one family in Israel who's not been personally affected in some way by having somebody that they've known that has lost their life, either in the attacks on October 7th or in the corresponding war. There have been hundreds of thousands of troops that have had to give of their time and their talents to protect their country. And there's been so much suffering. And yet, Israel has come through it in an amazing fashion. It's just been incredible what you've done. And anybody that looks at what's happened in this war and says that wasn't a miracle, just doesn't understand, just can't see it. But I pray more people would see it. I pray Israelis would see it. I pray that you would not allow Israelis to act out of pride and say, no, this was us. We are the ones who safeguarded our country. No, Lord, I pray that they would give glory to you, to their Creator. And I pray that you would continue to protect Israel in the days to come. And Lord, I pray that the dynamic that's been shifted in the region would really just create the conditions for peace throughout the region and economic prosperity for Israel. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, folks, thank you very much for joining me in that. Man, my voice is just shot today. All right, so I wanted to get to some of your questions and comments. Thank you, Mintree Koo. Wow, that's very kind of you. Here's a question from Marcos. Should we be worried about UNIFIL actively helping Hezbollah? Yes, we should, because they have been caught. At least, if not actively supporting Hezbollah, just willfully turning a blind eye to Hezbollah activities. I mean, before the war even started, UNIFIL, that's the United Nations interim force in Lebanon, interim, it's been there for decades, but they had to ask permission from Hezbollah to do patrols, and Hezbollah would tell them specifically what roads they could drive on and what areas they had to stay out of. Hezbollah was building its tunnel complexes and missile firing points and things like that right next to UNIFIL bases, using UNIFIL bases essentially as shields for their hostile operations against Israel. So they've been worse than worthless up there. And the fact that the United States continues to give them hundreds of millions of dollars a year for that mission is absolutely mind-boggling. It should be terminated immediately. The same with UNDOF over on the Syria side. UNDOF forces have had to ask for protection from the IDF. I mean, they've been, again, worse than worthless over there. They're just a massive hole that the United States pours money into through those UN agencies. And of course, UNRWA down in the south in Gaza has been actively engaged in supporting Hamas, and that's been proven over and over and over again. So they're worthless as well. All in all, the United Nations, I've been covering wars for more than 20 years, and every crisis zone I've ever been to where the United Nations is active, they have pretty much exacerbated the problem rather than addressed the problem. The United Nations is a spectacularly expensive failure in almost every way. So should the United States pull out of it? I might not go that far, because if we pull out of it, then it becomes an even bigger spectacular failure, because then it will be driven, the rules and everything will be driven by adversarial nations to the United States like Russia and China. So we don't necessarily want to take away our veto power from the UN, or it could get a whole lot worse. It's hard to imagine things being worse than they are, but they certainly could be in the case of, never underestimate how bad the UN could actually be. So, we should be worried about that. Sharon says, why is Trump bringing the terrorist leader from Syria to the White House the day before Veterans Day? Well, the United States is hoping against hope that a former al-Qaeda terrorist who spent 6 years in prison in Iraq being guarded by U.S. citizens, who called for the death of American soldiers, who worked actively to kill American soldiers, wanted terrorist, who now has become the interim self-declared leader of Syria. The United States is joining with the globalists around the world in hoping against hope that this means that Syria is now going to become a Jeffersonian democracy. And it's not. I have contacts inside Syria that I talk to on an almost daily basis. And anybody who lives in areas that are under the regime control will tell you that they are instituting Sharia law in those areas. That is not going well for the Christian minorities, the Kurds, the Alawites, the Druze, anybody. There have been significant clashes ongoing between regime forces and the Druze in Asweda down in the south, even in the last 2 days. We're talking about heavy artillery bombardments and things like that. The United States is really trying to bolster the new regime in hopes that they'll be able to at least bring a modicum of control, because for the last 10, 15 years, Syria has essentially been a failed state. The only parts of Syria that actually functioned well were the parts that were under Kurdish control. So the Kurds have been suffering a spike in strikes against their forces by ISIS as the al-Sharaa regime continues its control over the eastern part of Syria. And that's because, in large part, the new regime is somewhat a friendly environment, or at least a non-toxic environment against ISIS. So the remnants of ISIS are starting to get their act together and strike at the SDF, the Kurdish SDF, in recent days. At the same time, the United States has been withdrawing troops from Syria and has drawn down our forces to under 1,000 now. We've gone from like 8 bases inside Syria to, I think, 3 at this point. Now, again, this new report that just came out today from the Reuters says that one of the things the Trump administration is going to be talking with al-Sharaa about the day before Veterans Day on the 10th is the establishment of a U.S. airbase at the international airport in Damascus. Let me tell you something. If I was a U.S. troop, I would be begging God not to let me get sent to serve in Syria. I mean, war is hell, but oh my goodness, serving in Syria would suck on levels that I just, no thanks. And it's also, when you have U.S. troops, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that partnering with al-Sharaa leaves a very bitter taste in the mouth of anybody who's fought in the global war on terror against al-Qaeda or ISIS. Because now you have this terrorist in a suit who's trying to bamboozle the world into believing that he's not an extremist Muslim, but everybody he's putting into positions of power beneath him are ISIS fighters, former al-Qaeda, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, and a lot of that is being controlled by Turkey, who is the really dark horse here. I mean, they're the player that America ought to be more concerned about, but President Trump really likes Erdogan because he just doesn't understand the dynamics of the region. I hate to say that, but President Trump, I can say very assuredly, has no clue what he's doing in that region. He just does not understand the dynamics there. And he's looking at it from a business standpoint. Hey, we could get a lot of investments in Syria and make some money there. He's also looking at it from the Abraham Accord standpoint, and if al-Sharaa is willing to say that he will join the Abraham Accords and have a peace deal with Israel, that would be significant. I hand it to President Trump if he can do that. I'm not sure I would believe al-Shara, even if he said he would join the Abraham Accords, even if he did sign that paper, if there wouldn't eventually be conflict, armed conflict between the al-Shara government and the Israelis. But we'll have to just wait and see and pray and hope that, things get a little bit better. Quick question. How many PSYOP operations and stages does CIA operate to put on social media to sell opinions to influence the people? I'll answer that as succinctly as I can. I have visited undercover operations, covert operations during the war in Iraq, where three-letter agencies of the United States were engaged in what I would call propaganda operations. Now, this is not spreading misinformation necessarily. What I saw was that they were they were putting out positive information about what the United States was doing in the region to counter the misinformation that's being put out there by our enemies. That doesn't mean the United States is above putting out misinformation to try to move the needle. It just means that I haven't personally seen it. It would stand to reason that the United States cyber warfare operations would include influence operations on social media and elsewhere, just like everybody else does, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, etc. So very likely that does exist. The only thing I have personally seen were operations where a bunch of civilians were getting paid to find and disseminate positive information that portrayed American involvement in the region in a positive light. One other thing that I will point out is that it appears, this is something we haven't, there's not a lot of reporting on this, but just from my own sources, it appears that the United States is planning to have a much more significant military force, or some, maybe not military, but some sort of force, could be contractors or whatever, inside Israel going forward for the foreseeable future. And we've had U.S. troops in Israel for a long time. Even before the war, there were U.S. troops stationed in Israel at a secret base down in the Negev. There was a listening post down near the nuclear facility down there in Dima. Now, the United States has more than a couple thousand troops in Israel. That may significantly increase in the next few years to more than 10,000, perhaps. And that's a real possibility. Again, it may not be active duty U.S. troops. It might be contracted civilians or whatever. One of the ways that the United States avoids spending the political capital that they would obviously spend by having U.S. troops in harm's way is by hiring contractors from foreign countries. So they might take the form of people from the Philippines. We see a lot of Filipino contractors, people from Colombia, places like that. And putting those in place to do the work that U.S. forces would have been called on to do. We did that a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan at the end of the war. And so if an American contractor or a foreign contractor paid by America gets whacked in the war zone, there's not as much political fallout from that as there would be as having a U.S. infantryman or Marine killed in combat. So that's why they do that. It's also cheaper for them in the long run to do that. You don't have to pay people from the Philippines or Indonesia or whatever near as much as you would have to pay Americans to do the same job. Kathy McGree says, are we starting a war over there? No, I don't think we're planning to start a war. I think we're planning, the reason the United States is saying that they want to have an air base in Damascus is to support, I would say the better word would be encourage the al-Sharaa regime to live up to its obligations with the United States, to keep a better eye on what they're doing. If they're committing human rights abuses in Idlib, for example, it'd be a lot easier for the United States to know about that and to have something to say about that if we've got troops in Damascus. And really, under the Assad regime, there's no way we could have had a base in Damascus. We used to strike at Israel did, strike at the airfield in Damascus. I've been on that airport once on a layover, but we used to strike military targets at that airport from time to time. I say we, I mean Israel. But having an actual presence on the ground wasn't even an option. Now that it is, that's kind of a big deal. It's big news, at least, and it is something to be concerned about. But we'll have to keep an eye on it and see. Speaking of Armenia, our trip there is full. Oh yeah, I had to. My wife reminded me to point that out. We just had a cancellation for our trip to Armenia, so we have one room available now. So if you're interested in joining us in Armenia, it's a fabulous trip. It's really a great trip. And the reason we keep doing them is because people just love them. I mean, we probably have enough people who have been before to Armenia who would come back again because it was so great that we could run an entire trip just of alumni of our previous trips at this point. So if you are interested in joining us in Armenia, we do have one room available as we just had a cancellation. So just send an email to info@holtonnews.com and we will get you the information to join that trip. That is coming up June, I think it's 13th through the 23rd of next year. Coming up soon. And just to also remind you that we have a tour to Panama here coming up in April of next year, around spring break time frame. That is a great trip. We've had a ton of people on. I think we've done 3 of those now, 2 or 3 of those, and they've been very well received. People enjoy it. It's not as hardcore as some of the other tours we do. It's a lot more relaxed and laid back, and you get to come to Panama and just enjoy the incredible place where we live. Get to spend some time with my family and I as well. So we love to meet Hotzonians. And so that meetup is going on in April, I think the 9th through the 14th of April. If you're interested, again, just send an email to info@holtonnews.com. All right, moving on with the questions. Der Oberst says, where are you getting your info from on the IDF invading Lebanon? This is being reported in Arab media inside Lebanon. Now, for their part, Israel says we don't have plans for a full-scale invasion of Lebanon. They have made ground incursions into Lebanon just in the last few weeks. And that is what precipitated the Lebanese government to threaten to actually fight against the IDF if they do it again. Because Israel made an incursion into Lebanon on the ground, took out a few Hezbollah sites, and then moved back out again. Israel says, we're not going to rule out more incursions into Lebanon. We will do what we have to do. That's the message that's being put out by the IDF. The news that Israel may be considering ground strikes in Lebanon, I mean on the ground operations in Lebanon, comes from Arab media, and it's been reported in very reputable websites like the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, and others. So it's also being reported in the Jerusalem Post and Israel Hayom and other places. So that's where I'm getting my info. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Very kind of you for your contribution there. Lord Peanut says, do you think that a huge multi-direction attack is likely since they have no hostages? I really think a huge strike is planned from all directions. We'll have to wait and see. I do believe that Israel is not going to completely end their operations inside Gaza until they accomplish their objective of making sure Hamas does not have the ability to be a threat to them anymore. they may have to compromise on that a little bit. Destroying Hamas completely probably isn't in the cards for them. They'll get too much pushback from the United States to do that. But once they get the remaining hostages out, oh, and by the way, Israel has been returning the bodies of Palestinians as well. There was a big protest in Jerusalem today that's pressuring the Israeli government to pardon and release Israeli citizens who live in Judea and Samaria who have been arrested for clashes with Palestinians, because many of those people that were the Palestinians who were arrested in those clashes have been released under the agreement, the ceasefire agreement. So in the thousands of Palestinians who have been released, many of them were people who were terrorists that were arrested for committing acts of terror against Israelis. And when the Israelis fight back against those people, sometimes the Israelis also get arrested. And so there's a huge protest in Jerusalem today to try to get the Israeli government to release those Israelis. That's one more thing that went on. Okay, so let's see what else here. Robert says, weapon cache found Vienna. What types were found? I didn't see that. I'll have to go look that up. Housecat says, does UNIFIL warn Israel about moves by Hezbollah? No, they do not. Not to my knowledge. Klamath River Media says, any update on Ukraine and Russia? How do I track drone attacks by Russia on Ukraine? Israel has Red Alert app, phone front command. Does Ukraine have any phone app to track? They do, except they don't really have the ability to pinpoint the communities that are under threat. So when they detect, for example, planes taking off inside Russia that could be carrying glide bombs to strike at Ukraine, they pretty much just alert the entirety of the country of Ukraine. And so it's not all that useful. Most people in Ukraine just sort of ignore the warnings. Now, I'm going to go to Ukraine in a week or so, and I'll take a look at that and see if that's changed. But as of less than a year ago, when I was there last time, most Ukrainians just ignored the warnings. And sometimes those alarms just go off all day long across Ukraine. And the places that get struck, they're getting warned, but it's almost like crying wolf, because when you're warning the entire country, or even specific regions, oblasts of the country, that's not precise enough to really make people all that concerned. And they just don't have the capability that Israel has to do that. That has improved somewhat since the beginning of the war, but not all that much. Kevin Sutter says, should the USA ban CARE and MB? Yes, they should. I don't know about MB, or if you're talking MBS. I don't know that they should ban MBS, but CARE for sure. Heavenly Hope says, thoughts on Palestinian being made into humanitarian cause to change narratives around the world? Well, we've talked about that quite a bit on this podcast throughout the war. And it's not that there isn't a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and other places, but I mean, there certainly is. You can go to Jordan and see Palestinians that are living in pretty much squalor. But it all comes down to what I often say, which is that if you're going to commit acts of terror on unsuspecting citizens, civilian innocents, you don't get to have nice things. You're not going to have a good life if your entire worldview is based on who you hate. And that is the disease that virtually all Palestinians suffer from. So until that changes, the Palestinians are always going to be a humanitarian nightmare. And so there you go. Thank you, The Convergence. Appreciate that donation. You're very kind. Cheswick says, why isn't Israel open to inspection from nuclear agencies? That's a good question. And I don't know that I have a good answer. They have not been pressured to do so. And part of that, I would say, if there was a good answer to that question, it would be simply the fact that everyone knows that Israel is not going to use nuclear weapons in an offensive capacity ever. If Israel uses their nuclear weapons, it would likely be against Iran, and they would do so in a defensive capacity only. But even that goes back to what I always say about nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons function as a deterrent, not as an offensive weapon, because any nation, including Israel, that uses nukes is going to create such fallout for their own country that it would negate the benefits of using the weapon. That's why I don't think Russia is going to use nukes. But, they don't call for inspections of American nuclear capabilities either. It's not like we have the IAEA doing inspections of American nuclear facilities. Why? Because they're not a bunch of crazy extremist zealots that are threatening the entire world, whereas Russia and Iran certainly are. Iran makes it very, very, very clear. If we get a nuke, we're going to use it on Tel Aviv. If that's your stance, then yeah, we need to have inspections. But Israel's stance on nukes is nothing like that. So they don't really need to have inspections. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Micah says, what do you think has to be done to defeat ISIS or the prospect of an Islamic extremist caliphate once and for all? I don't know that you're ever going to defeat ISIS once and for all. I talked about this on yesterday's live, which, by the way, was demonetized immediately because I was talking too much about the kind of violence that is perpetrated on the world by those radical elements. And I just wasn't careful enough about how I couched it. So they demonetized both of those videos. And that is costly for us. Really, we need the ad revenue from YouTube to pay our employees. We've got a half dozen employees now, and we're paying out more than $10,000 a month in salaries and stuff for all those people. So it hurts when we get demonetized, for sure. That's why I encourage people to go to chuckholton.com. If you're going to support us over there, and that helps to smooth out those problems that we have with YouTube from time to time. But the bottom line is, talking about defeating ISIS once and for all, what you're really talking about is having to defeat radical Islamic jihadism, and you're talking about maybe a couple 100 million people around the globe. That's not a realistic goal. That's a larger army, if you want to call it that, than any army on planet Earth, and for sure. By a long shot. So it's something that we have had to deal with for generations, and we're going to have to deal with probably to the end of time. One of the things I was talking about yesterday, and I didn't get into it as much as I wanted to, is just how much our lives have been affected by radical Islamic jihadism in terms of just everyday costs that we have to bear. How many hundreds of billions of dollars do we have to sink into additional security because of the threat of this? How much inconvenience and how much time is lost to the security checks we have to undergo when we go to the airport or we go any place? The additional policing, the additional military, all of that comes down to, if you could snap your fingers and remove the threat of Islamic terror from across the globe, everything in this world would get better, even for the Muslims. Everybody's lives would be better. The radical elements of Muslim society make everything in our lives worse. They don't add or contribute anything positive to the world. And we should do everything we can to eradicate them, or at least to keep them hiding in their holes in the ground, drive them back under the rocks out from which they climbed. And that's why we need a robust force of people who is willing to take on that burden. And we're never going to be able to live in a Pollyannic world where we don't need the kind of security forces anymore. The more concerning thing that I talked about yesterday is how that threat is not only now being represented by radical Islamic terror, but it's bleeding over into radical leftist terror. And over time, at least in the modern world, communism and socialism has been a much more deadly force than radical Islamic terror has been around the globe. I talked about that yesterday. I probably just got demonetized for today's live for even talking about that. Kathy Humphrey says, do you have any idea how much you help us understand what is going on in our world? Well, I hope to. I've been doing this for a long time, and I try to bring my unique perspective to bear, being somebody that has to spend more than 200 days a year on the road outside of the United States. You know, I spend more than 200 nights a year in a hotel. I don't enjoy that. I get, some years, I get less than a month or two in my own bed out of the entire year. I don't do that because I love it. I mean, I do love parts of the job, but that's one part of it that really sucks. Because I would rather be in my own bed. I'd rather be at home with my dogs and, in a nice, safe place where nobody's trying to kill me. But that's not where the information is that you need. And there's so much misinformation going around out there. So many pundits who claim to know what they're talking about that just are dead wrong, 100% wrong. People like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor. When Colonel McGregor earlier this year was saying that a third of Tel Aviv had been destroyed, I was in Tel Aviv and I brought you video footage showing you how wrong he was. Showing you could drive all over Tel Aviv and not see any damage at all. That's expensive. It's costly for me personally. And it's something that I'm willing to do because I think it's important. This is my calling. So thank you for those of you who support us in that. Santos TV says, will the USA ever ditch Israel? Are they too important spies of the Middle East? I don't know what the heck you're talking about. There was a report that just came out that showed that the United States gives Israel about $3.8 billion a year in aid. And the return on our investment that we get in terms of intelligence sharing, technology sharing, things like that, is more than $48 billion a year. It's a pretty darn good return on investment. If I had $3,800 and I could turn it in 1 year into $480,000, I would make that investment all day long. Israel is a spectacularly good investment for the United States, to say nothing of the moral component, which we should stand by Israel, number one, because we're commanded to in the Bible, but number two, because Israel is the most moral military force on planet Earth. And I say that unequivocally, having spent a lot of time in Israel, seeing how they do business. They're very, very moral. They work very hard to limit civilian casualties more than any other force on planet Earth does. So spies in the Middle East, yeah, in a way, Israel's ability to gather intelligence in the Middle East is unparalleled. The United States doesn't have anything approaching Israel's abilities in the Middle East. And so the information sharing that they engage in with us is incredibly valuable and saves American lives every year. And so definitely we should continue that relationship. The cat lady says, as an Israeli, this worries me. It's to control us. What happens when another president is in the White House? The U.S. is actually holding us in a chokehold. Am I wrong? Look, I think Israel needs to work on getting more independent in terms of their own ability to defend themselves. And this war has been a real wake-up call for Israel, and so they have made great strides towards doing that. They've been producing a lot more weapons inside Israel now rather than buying them from other countries. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to have a president that supports Israel, and Donald Trump supports Israel more than probably any modern president has done. But He's also kind of unpredictable and tends to, try to literally, Israel say, we're under threat from Hezbollah in this place up in Lebanon. We're going to bomb Beirut. And President Trump will say, no, you can't do that. As if President Trump can tell a sovereign nation what they can and cannot do. Now, if we're investing $3.8 billion a year in your country, we ought to have some say. And obviously we can control by the power of the purse, by saying, well, you can do what you need to do, but if you do something that we don't agree with, we're just going to stop supporting that. That's exactly what President Biden was doing. He was trying to straddle the fence during the entire war, and that just prolonged the war completely, no question about that. Really resulted in a lot of people dying because of that, both Palestinians and Israelis. So President Biden was really feckless in his foreign policy. President Trump, I criticize him when I think he's doing something wrong, but by and large, he's been much, 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 much better than President Biden, and even more better than President Kamala Harris would have been. So I shouldn't complain. But yeah, it is an issue that I think Israelis need to be concerned about. Sure. And if you're a country like Israel, you should be working to be more independent in every way so that you never have to feel pressured by a country to do something that's not in your best interest. Why is UNIFIL even there? Completely useless. That's a rhetorical question. It's self-evident. Verena says, do you think this will be a forever war till the end? In some sense, yes. But I think what we're seeing right now is an era of peace being brought to Israel that will last for many years, I believe. There may still be some conflict between Israel and the Houthis, or Israel and Iran, or Israel and Hezbollah. But for the most part, Israelis are safer today than they have been in years, many years, more than just during this war. Israel is far safer than the United States today. You take any city in the United States that's got more than 300,000 people in it, and the crime, the chances of you being a victim of violent crime in that American city would be orders of magnitude more than your chances of being a victim of violence in Israel, anywhere in Israel would be. You could even just live in Judea and Samaria, which is one of the sketchiest places to live in all Israel, and you'd still be safer, objectively safer, than you would be in the United States. I think a lot of people don't realize that. Ron Hicks says, if we build an airbase in Damascus, won't we have to be concerned about terrorist attacks? Yes, we will. Absolutely. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but we're definitely going to have to take steps to secure that. Cheryl Miller says, I joined late, so this has been addressed, disregarded. Is it true that some of the tunnels, 200 Hamas, are flooded by IDF? I mentioned that. There was some video that came out of the IDF flooding tunnels with concrete. I don't know if that was old video or not. It hasn't been, but we don't know. Robert says, what's the most recent news on Gazans hold up in tunnel? Okay, we just talked about that. Kevin says, why don't fellow Arabs take in the Palestinians? Because Palestinians are in some ways like Venezuelans in that they tend to cause the crime rate to increase anywhere you get a significant number of them. And look, Venezuelans are nice people. I like Venezuelans. I've met a lot of Venezuelans. And I've met a lot of Palestinians that I like too. Remember, there's a lot of Palestinian Christians. And they're great people. They're great people. All of the employees at the YMCA hotel in Jerusalem, where I often stay, are Palestinian Christians, and they're wonderful people. So I don't mean to paint with too broad a brush. But in general, if you get 1 million Palestinians together in one place, the crime rate, the rate of violence and terror and everything else is going to go through the roof. Because many of those people just don't know how to do civilized culture. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Venezuelans that we've heard from across Latin America, here in Panama, for example. When we got a big influx of Venezuelan migrants, The crime rate went through the roof. It just is what it is. Again, I love Venezuelans. I support many Venezuelans. I've donated a ton of money to Venezuelans to try to help Venezuelans everywhere I can. But the truth is what it is. Cheryl Miller, thank you for that $10. I appreciate that. You're very kind. Cindy Hurd, Chuck helped me to understand the Biden administration was really pushing the global idea, and we see what that has done to Europe and the UK, Ireland. Yep, that's right. That's what you're going to get with Democrats. Can your banner video be viewed elsewhere? Bamner video. Does anybody know what he's talking about? I'm not sure what he's talking about there. Sorry. Charles Sutton says, where can we get crime stats for Israel? Ask Chat GPT. It'll find them for you. They are published. The murder rate in the United States is like 5.8 per 100,000. The murder rate in Israel is 0.3 per 100,000. That's what I mean. Israel is so much safer than the U.S. Cindy Hurd, does Sharia laws govern our laws, or do our laws govern Sharia law? Sharia law is not compatible with American law. Point, period, end of story. The U.S. Constitution is not compatible with Sharia law, and so Sharia law should be banned in the United States. South American Express, would Israel accept $3.8 billion from the U.S. if it was a loan and not charity? Maybe. Israel has bought additional billions of dollars worth of weapons, airplanes, other technology from the United States. And the U.S. has a lot of foreign direct investment in Israel as well. So, yeah, probably. And I think that's more kind of President Trump's tack here. Look, I wouldn't consider anything that we give to Israel to be charity. Like I said, if we hand them $3.8 billion a year and we get back the equivalent of $48 billion a year, that's not charity that we're giving them. This is a partnership, and it should be viewed as such. So we shouldn't look at it as charity. Srini Rao says, how does Israel track released prisoners? No, they don't implant tracking devices as far as I know. Should they? That'd be interesting. That'd probably be considered a human rights abuse, though, to do that. I'm sure that they have taken steps that we don't know about. I know of some steps that they've taken that I can't discuss to keep track of, to gather better intelligence about movements of terrorists inside Judea and Samaria and Hebron, inside East Jerusalem, and inside Gaza. And that's all I'll say about that. And that is our last question for today. So, wow, we've gone really late. We keep going later and later, but you guys have a lot of great questions. And I feel like if you're asking the questions, then I should take the time to answer them. So thank you very much for being a part of the podcast today. Again, it means a lot when you donate. And I don't ask for money. If you just pay attention, I never ask you to give money to me. If I'm raising money for somebody else typically. However, we do benefit from the donations that you voluntarily give, and we try to use those the best way we can to help people around the globe wherever we go. We bring that news to you. And, you know, I'll give you an example. I heard from a single mom in South Africa some months ago. She says, look, there's no men in our lives. There's all the men have just abandoned us. And I'm responsible for providing for me, my kids, and my grandkids. And I just lost my job. And we got nothing. We got no food. So can you help us? And I sent her some money. And that was, I don't know, a year ago. Now I'm hearing from her again. We're completely out of money. Can you please help us again? when I consider something like that, I have to be careful because I don't want to create dependency. I don't want to become somebody's ATM or sugar daddy. I got enough problems with the people that I'm duty bound to support. Same thing with the girls that we support in Colombia. They could come up with a reason to need more money every single day. And so most of the time that they ask for money, I don't even answer them. I just ignore it. I only give them what I think would be helpful to them, and I only give it in ways that I think would be helpful. So, for example, we give money to the church down there, and then the church gets to bless people in their, in their circle, etc. But when you all are so generous in just the super chats and super thanks, and I look at that, I go, I can't say no to these people. I obviously I don't want to do anything that hurts them in the long run, so I got to be careful about that. But if somebody's in need, then I feel like I ought to help them, because people are just so generous and kind in helping us, and so that's you having an impact on people through the hot zone. This is a great thing about this new media, is that you can interact with me. I'm not just a anchor man on the evening news that you can listen to and be depressed about all the bad things that are happening in the world. I can bring you all the bad things that are happening in the world, and you can actually reach through the technology and do something about it, and actually help the people directly on the ground through us. So thank you to those of you who do that. I'm always just so humbled by the generosity that, you all have given tens of thousands of dollars a year that we've been able to pass along to people that are in need. And you're changing lives, saving lives, bringing people to Christ because of your generosity. So thank you. Keep it up. And I appreciate the chance to be able to join you in that. All right. Oh, wow. Somebody, who's that? Kevin just gave $100. Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. You're very kind. I'm going to send that $100 directly to that lady in South Africa, because you're so generous. I'm going to send that directly on to her. All right. Thank you very much. We will see you all again next time. Have a great day. Take care.